Hi, it's Georgiana from AdornIt, and I'm here today to teach you the basics of paper piecing. We use paper piecing in this darling Snowman tabletopper, and I want to show you how to get started if this is a brand new concept to you. You will absolutely love it. Paper piecing is great because it can be forgiving, but yet you're going to still come out and have perfect corners. So you're absolutely going to fall in love with this fun technique. So let me show you some of my favorite how-tos on how to get started. Inside of our Snowman tabletopper kit, when you receive it, you will receive all the fabric you need, the instructions, and you're going to receive the pre-printed templates for your paper piecing. Now these are printed onto a lighter weight paper, and they are a legal size, so they are longer, so they will match up to our tabletopper pattern when you go to sew it. Now paper piecing can be done on regular text paper. There's also some great products out on the market that are made specifically for foundation paper piecing, but I have found that as long as you start with a smaller stitch length, so that means in your sewing machine, when you go to get started, you're going to shorten the length of your stitching. That will help it so that when you go to tear your paper off of the back, that it tears off very nicely and doesn't pull your stitches. So the secret to that is shortening your stitch length. Okay, here is a sample of the different pages that you're going to get inside the kit. Now, you will notice on here it says print 4 pages. You can just ignore that because we have included 4 pages for you. So you're just going to make sure that you have that many pages of your templates, okay? So there are different templates to make the face, the body, the corners. So all that will come in your kit. Now the first thing you're gonna want to do with your paper piecing is you will want to cut them apart because they are each their own template. And so I just cut right around them like this, and I like to leave about a 1/4 inch around, but really there's not a right or wrong way. I just highly suggest that you don't cut exactly to your line, and let me explain why. So on your template, each of the templates have an inner line, which is your seam allowance, and they have an outer line, which is your trim line. So for instance, here is our corner template. It's the same thing. You have your seam allowance and then your trim line. So we are actually going to be sewing on the lines, and then the seam allowance is when you piece your blocks together, that's where you're going to sew. So that is why I like, as I am cutting out my templates, that I don't cut exactly on that trim line, because that's going to allow you, like I said earlier, the freedom and forgiveness when you go to cut those, so that your fabric is going to be just perfect. Okay, there is a lot of cutting when it comes to this cute tabletopper. And so what I recommend is in the cutting instructions, it goes through every fabric and breaks down exactly what you need to cut. So I did that step first. I went through and I cut all my fabric. And then my next step, so I didn't mix up pieces, is I matched it with my templates, and I put all of them into stacks so that it was easy as I came and went from my sewing machine, that I could just pick up where I left off. So I recommend taking the pieces and putting them with their paper piecing template into piles. So that's the best way to keep it all organized. Okay, so let's get started and show you how to start doing this. Now, I chose to start with the Snowman body because it has the angled corners, and I feel like that was the part that I wasn't quite sure on when I started this. And so I wanted to dive right in and show you how to start that. Okay, here I have our Snowman body template. Now, when we do paper piecing, we are going to sew onto the front side of our template. So that means in order to place our fabric, we need to flip it over, and we need to place our fabric wrong sides to the paper so that the right side is facing up, okay? And what we're going to do is we are going to fill our entire Snowman body 1, this rectangle section, we're going to make sure that is filled with this fabric. And then what we're going to do is we are going to take our half square triangles. So we had a 2.5 inch square, we cut them in half so they were triangles, and we're going to put that fabric right sides together with your tiny dot white, and we are going to do square or rectangle number 2. So I need to bring my rectangle over here, or excuse me, my triangle over there. And now here is the part I would grab a light box or a window to make sure that you have your placement of your triangle, because I am going to now flip this over so that you can see how that triangle is going to be. So I need to make sure with your light box or your window that that burnish aqua comes up about in this area right here, so that I have a 1/4 inch seam allowance when I do that. So I can tell right now that it's not where it needs to be, so I'm going to scoot that up and make sure that I have that seam allowance right there. So now I'm going to flip it back over so you guys can see how that looks. Now I am going to pin that into place. And I recommend pinning it there, and I recommend pinning this rectangle down as well so that it doesn't slip as we go. Okay, now we're going to take it to the sewing machine. Okay, here I have my template, and we're going to go ahead and we are going to sew on line number 2. Okay, now I am using black thread for the purpose of this demonstration so you guys can see exactly where I'm sewing, but I recommend that you're using a white thread since so much of the snowman has the white body, that use a light color thread. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place this template into my machine. I have shortened my stitch length, so make sure you do that on your sewing machine. And then now I am just going to put my needle down and I'm going to sew right along that line. And then I'm going to take and I'm going to cut my thread, and that is what that looks like. Okay, I'm going to trim up my thread and then I'll show you guys how we're going to press it open. Okay, here we have our triangles sewn on. Again, remember they are right sides together, and you can see here I have my line sewn on there, and look, when you press that open, there are your angled corners. So what you can do with the paper piecing is you can just finger press it if you desire to do it that way, or you can take and use your iron if you would like, and use a light setting and just kind of make sure the press happens there. I wouldn't use steam or water because of that paper underneath. You don't want to mess with that. You can take and trim your corners, but a tip for the triangle portion of this is to leave this section of fabric here for stability. Now, the other steps you'll see in a minute. We're going to trim our seam allowance, but it is recommended for those triangles to leave that background fabric there and not trim that off. Okay, all right, so let's go ahead and let's add the next part, which is we are going to fill section 4 and 5 with our burnish aqua. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip it over, and we're going to go to number 4, which is this section. And what we're going to do is we're going to put right sides together again. So see how I flip that over, and we're going to pin that rectangle. And then I'm going to flip this over to show you. We're going to be sewing on line 4. Okay, so I'm going to do that with 4, and then I'm going to also do it with 5 right here so that we can sew both edges. Okay, I have my rectangles pinned onto both sides. My stitch allowance, the stitch length is lessened, or shortened, excuse me. And now we're gonna go ahead and we are going to sew on that line. Now it is okay if you don't start and stop right on that line. If you wanna go a little bit over, you can absolutely do that as well. So, but it is important that you sew right on the line. We're gonna switch and we are gonna go to this side. Okay, let's trim that up and see how it looks. Okay, here we have it. We're gonna take out our pins and look at that. If we fold that back, there we go. That then fills space 4 and 5. So what we need to do is now we need to trim that seam allowance. So what that means is we're just going to take and we're just going to peel back this paper, just fold it back, And then we're going to take our ruler here and we are going to trim 1/4 inch off of each side. That just helps get rid of all that excess fabric. So remember how earlier I said that paper piecing has a lot of forgiveness? Well, that is why. It's because you can see how much excess material is there. So if you accidentally bump the fabric and it moves a little bit, then you're gonna be just fine, because we cut those squares bigger than they need to be. So that just helps us. Then once again, you're gonna want to finger press that, or you're going to want to get your iron and just lightly iron out those edges like this. And then you can see now how I have that section complete. So with each of these snowmen, you're going to complete 4 of each of the different pieces of the body, because there are 4 snowmen to the table topper. So now as you go, you will just be able to follow these instructions, and always remember that you're sewing on the front side, which means your fabric is wrong side to the template right there. And then as you're working with your pieces on here, you're gonna have right sides together to get all of your fabric pieces to work nicely together. Now, the next thing, once you get it all sewn together, it is important that you read your instructions, because it is going to tell you when you get to the end of each section, which ends that you need to trim, because you are going to want to trim the pieces that go together. So it's very important that you read your instructions carefully as you go. And then when you get to the part where you're going to start assembling all of it together, you can either tear it away all at once, or you can sew all your pieces together with your seam allowances and then tear it off all at the end once you have it, because you will be tearing off this paper. You don't keep your paper on. And so I myself, when I assembled my cute little table topper, I kept all my pieces, all my paper pieces on until the very end, and then I tore them. Okay, so let me show you a completed block. Okay, here is one of my completed blocks. So like I said just a moment ago, you can tear off all the paper once you get to this part, or you can wait and do it all at one time. So when you go to tear it, this is your back. I've already torn some of it apart. It's really simple, and especially where you shorten your stitch length, you'll be able to just start tearing. What I did find helpful is I went from the inside outwards, so that when I got to the edges, then I didn't tear my seams. So it just, even though you shorten that stitch length, it makes it a little bit easier to do it that way. So you can see here, you just start tearing that paper away. It's really satisfying, I think. And then you can see how I've cut all my seam allowance length. So look how nice that looks. Those are nice and short, because if you didn't do that, look how this one didn't get done. They're gonna be long, sloppy. So that's why you want to do right here and cut those seam allowances, okay? So that is how you tear your paper away. One more question you might be having now: what happens if I mess up? You know what? That is okay. If you still have your paper on your fabric, then go ahead and unpick it. So I just took a seam ripper and I very gently and very lightly unpicked my stitches, and then I was able to move my fabric and redo it. So don't worry, you guys, it is okay to unpick. I especially had to unpick when I was putting my pieces of my table topper together, joining them, because it's very important that you align each of your pieces with that arrow so that your snowman is nice and centered. And so I had a few times that I did have to unpick. So like I said, as long as your paper is still attached, it's no big deal. Just take your seam ripper and slightly take out those stitches and try it again. Thanks so much for watching my beginner paper piecing video. This is part of our Table Topper subscription club, so that every month you can receive a darling table topper in the mail. It comes with all your fabric, your instructions, embroidery patterns. You can see we embroidered on this cute little table topper. Not all of them are paper piecing in the Table Topper Club. Each one's a little bit different with a fun technique. So Thank you for watching, and make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel.